Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the McKinney. This is their part number T4A3786, NRP 2060, 4.5, 4.5. That's what that is. This is a hinge. This is what that hinge looks like. At first glance, that might appear obvious to you that it's a heavyweight hinge. The giveaway on that is the 4 bearing packets. And that T4A3786 means everything about this hinge. Along with the NRP, it does as well. Let's take some basic dimensional properties of this hinge, and then we'll talk about where you use this. It's a 4.5, 4.5, so that means that the height of the hinge, which is the first dimension, is 4.5 inch. So it's 4.5 inch tall and 4.5 inch wide. Being a heavyweight hinge in a 4.5 inch height means that it's 180 thousandths of an inch leaf thickness. So let's take a look at that. We have our caliper here that we can take a look at that with. According to the caliper, that's exactly 0.180 inch. Sorry about that. Lots of noises. 0.180 inch. That means it's heavyweight. It is unusual for one of these to measure exactly what they're to be. All hinges are within tolerance, but that's exactly 0.18 inch, and that's what a heavyweight hinge in a 4.5 inch height would measure. If you get to 5 inch or 6 inch, you're going to have different leaf thicknesses from standard to heavyweight. Is the point. So where would you use this hinge? Let's talk about that right now. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Now, where are you going to use this hinge? Let's talk about that right now. So first of all, it's a standard size, at least for most door distributors, door manufacturers, hinge manufacturers, contractors, all of us, specifiers. A 4.5, 4.5 is really the most common commercial hinge size that you'll ever see. And we generally only deviate from this size when it's best practice to do so, whether it be the height or the width or certainly the thickness and other particulars about the hinge. So in the sense of this being 4.5, 4.5, it's pretty typical. If I was going to insert any commentary about selecting the size, I would certainly subject the width to a review. 4.5 inch wide is not always the correct size, and likely in most instances there's a better size that can be used, such as 4 inch wide could very commonly be a better size. But 4.5 inch height is a really great typical size for most installations. Now 4.5, 4.5 ball bearing standard weight would be our baseline. Well, this is that hinge, except it's heavyweight. So why would you use or consider a heavyweight hinge? And the reason you would is because you have a door, most likely, that's just simply heavier, like a 16 gauge door versus an 18 gauge door, or you've got a door with higher volume use. It's cycled far more than typical. Sure, you'd want a thicker hinge, no doubt about that. So that would be 2 instances where you'd very much likely see this hinge specified. Now, if you were to have a door that would be, and again, a baseline door size would be, a baseline regarding the door size would be 3070. If you were to have a door that were to be wider than 3 foot, you'd probably want to consider a taller hinge. And the reason that you're going to want to consider a taller hinge is generally because you've got a door that's wider, so the width of the door really impacts the hinge's ability to actually just do its job. The more weight hanging off of the hinge in this sort of axis really works to fatigue that hinge. So you get wider than 3.0, you're probably going to want to think about a taller hinge. Or maybe just a maybe a 3'4", go with a heavyweight hinge. You get 3'6" and wider, you'll want to think about 5-inch hinges, and depending on it being 18 or 16 gauge and whether or not it's low frequency or high frequency, you might use standard or heavyweight, might be how you would approach that. So depending on the door weight and width, that's really going to determine exactly the hinge that you'll end up using. And every good hinge manufacturer's catalog has a good guideline, and higher volume than typical or a little bit heavier than average is what all those catalogs are going to tell you that you'll see a heavyweight 4.5. Now, I talked about the width. You're going to want to review every width of hinge that you install, specify, request, order, and it's very simple. So just like we think about what height of hinge to use, for 1 3/4 thick doors, 4-inch, 4.5, 5, 6-inch. There's 8x6 hinges, there's 8x8 hinges. Not that that would necessarily fit on an 1 3/4 thick door, but there's lots of sizes. Then you, of course, you get into like a 4.5x4 or a 5x4, 5x4.5, 5x5, 5x6, 5x7. You've got wide throws. You've got hinges that are narrower than average. So the point being is, we calculate the height, we need to think about the width as well. It's best practice to take that vertical axis of pivoting and tuck it as close to the face of the door as possible. So in an application where you have a 8-inch masonry wall and that 5 3/4 frame is set in the center of that, you're going to want to calculate, what is my vertical axis of pivoting? Where does that need to be located so that my door will swing to the required degree of opening? Is it 110? Is it 180? Is it just 90? In an application where you have a partition wall and your frame wraps that partition wall and there's no clearance, casing, plinth blocks, baseboard, nothing's installed that's going to cause an obstacle for the door to hit. In that instance, the vertical axis of pivoting, you're going to want to suck it back to the face of the door as much as possible. 4.5 wouldn't be the right hinge for that. It wouldn't be the best choice for that. A 4.5x4 would be a better choice. And the way that we determine that is by using the wide throw formula, which is door thickness minus hinge back set. And the hinge back set is the amount of the door that's not been prepped for the hinge. It's about 1/4 inch generally. It could be a little more. I've seen it a little bit less. So 1 3/4 minus 1/4, so that's 1.5 inches. Door thickness minus back set times 2. 1 3/4 minus 1/4 times 2 is 3 inch. You then add your inset, which is the dimension from the face of the frame to the face of the door. That can be 0. It can be a 1/16 of an inch. It could be 8 inches. It could be anything. But typically it'll be 0. It'll be either extremely close to 0 or 0. But it can be something else. If you've got an exterior residential opening and the frames came out to the job and they're all 4 9/16 except that those walls are 6 1/4, you can either order new doors and frames, or at least new frames, or you can apply jam extensions. Well, in a jam extension, where you're literally adding to the pull side of the opening, that rabbet gets bigger, you're gonna find that the standard dimension of where the axis of pivoting is not in a good place, because now you've got jam extensions installed and the knuckle assembly of the hinge is actually hitting the rabbet. So you can either go with a hinge with a wider, a greater width, or you can use a raised barrel hinge. But you have to think about clearance, and you add that. So right now we're at 3 inch, plus our inset. We're going to call it 0, because it's either 0 or very close to 0 in almost all instances, but it could be any dimension. You add that to the 3 inch. You then add any clearance, meaning do you have chair rail installed that you need to build off the face of the door, because the concept of this is we're trying to figure out what vertical axis of pivoting needs to be if we want to rotate that door to 180 degrees. Will we achieve our full open requirement based on the hardware that we've selected? In order to select the right hardware, you've got to run the formula for width. Door thickness minus back set times 2 plus inset plus clearance. Round it up to the next commercially available size. In our scenario, we're at 4 by 3 1/16. It's going to end up becoming a 4 inch wide hinge, because there is no 3.5 is how that works. So that's how that works. That's wide throw. Now, this is a non-removable pin hinge. That is another tip-off. that this door swings out. It can be interior as well as exterior, certainly exterior. The point being is it will help drive that pin out. And I've tried to drive those pins out. When that NRP, that set screw, has been tightened down on the pin, it does not come out. It didn't for me. There's a groove cut in that pin, and that set screw gets driven in there or tightened in there. You can't pull that pin out. So it would be best practice to specify a security feature on the hinge in all outswing applications. We used to just think about it as exterior doors, but it could be interior doors as well. You don't want to simply drive the pins out and be able to take the door off if it's, you know, some sort of secured storage. It could be serialized inventory with a very high value. Or here's a more appropriate. You've got a pharmaceutical closet in a hospital, in a particular wing of the hospital. You've got drugs that are being locked up there. Let's just say that door swings out. That's going to have a security feature. It's an interior door, but it will have a security feature. Exterior doors that swing out will have that security feature as well. Let's switch to the screen view and let's talk about, actually before we do that, let's dissect this part number. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now let's get back to it. Now my ability to dissect a McKinney part number is less strong as it is with other manufacturers, but the bottom line is T4A is certainly going to mean heavyweight. The 3786 tells me that it's a 5-knuckle full mortise steel-based hinge. So all of that together conspires to mean 5-knuckle, heavyweight, ball bearing, full mortise. You can see from the bend on the hinge leaves here, that's what we call a full mortise hinge. When those leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush into the edge of the door and into the rabbet of the frame. It also means it's steel-based. If it was a T4A3786, it would be a non-ferrous-based material. And that it's a template hole pattern, certainly that's inferred there as well. So to that T4A3786, you add your size. You add any options that you want to this type of hinge. Security options, options in terms of bearing, or tip options, or corner options, etc. Also in the part number should include a reference to what screws you want. This is the standard fastener package, and this came with all wood screws and all machine screws. I would not just simply rely on the fact that the factory will send you what you need. Let's say that this came with half wood screws and all machine screws, but you had a wood door and wood frame. This would not give you the right amount of screws. Those machine screws that are there in the package, they have what's called a thread forming end on them. They're literally able to, you can kind of see it at the tip of my finger, they're able to cut threads into a templated, a drilled and tapped reinforcement in a door and frame. When doors and frames at the hollow metal factory go through the paint process, they're not going through there and cleaning out any paint that's in the tapped holes of the reinforcements for locks, obviously hinges, concealed hardware, anything that's been drilled and tapped. So that thread forming screw tip is pretty typical. The book will tell you that every time you're installing hardware, you would run a tap through there and properly prepare those threaded holes to receive the fasteners, but I don't do it. I do it when it's obvious that the thread cutting or the standard application of the fastener is not going to work. I will clear that out, and I would do it in all instances where certainly it was required. I wouldn't just try to run that screw in. Okay, let's switch to the screen view and let's take a closer look at the supporting information. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, here is the hinge that we are indeed looking at. T4A3786-4-1, 26D NRP. Recommended for use on high frequency and or heavy wood or metal doors in schools, hospitals, other public buildings where heavy traffic is experienced. Heavyweight hinges should be used on all extra heavy doors or those exposed to high frequency use. Talks about the included fasteners, 12/24 by 1/2 inch flat undercut head thread forming tips. The wood screws are 12 by 1.25 inch threaded to the head, flat head. Non-removable pin is what this hinge is. It's an NRP, 5 knuckle, 180 thousandths square corner, made of steel, satin chrome finish. 8 holes, that's a template pattern. We'll take a closer look at that as well. This link here to the catalog is the full line catalog from the manufacturer, so we'll skip over that for a moment. By the way, when you buy one, we'll ship you one. They're priced and sold per hinge. Cross-reference, this is handy because you'll be able to take your, let's say that you have a competitor's part number. You'll be able to convert that to a McKinney part number. Here's our T4A3786. You can convert from other manufacturers' part numbers, Bomber, Hager, and Stanley, to that hinge. That's a handy document. Brochure. This is just an overview of some of the things that McKinney can do about different hanging devices in their product line. So that would be there for your review. Now the catalog that we opened, you will be able to see, by the time you're seeing this video, a link to the cut sheet. Because at this moment that cut sheet's not linked, I'm going to just show you what that document looks like. Here it is. One thing that McKinney does that others don't really do is they have a different hinge based on a square edge or a beveled edge door. For beveled edge doors, it's best to use the T4A4386 because the bend that needs to occur on that leaf is, well, actually, before we go further, this is a good example of a raised barrel hinge where you have, let's say, a jam extension. You've added a jam extension where normally the barrel would sit here, but now you've added a 1-inch jam extension, which is here. So you can either go with a wider throw hinge and move that axis out here, or you go with a raised barrel like I've drawn here. All right, let's get rid of all of this. So we have a frame. We have a square edge door. Okay, it's obvious where that barrel needs to sit. Okay, is going to be different than when we have a beveled edge door. This is exaggerated, obviously, but nonetheless. Oh. So if we had that standard hinge, that hinge would kind of just go off this way, wouldn't it? Well, that's not going to work. You want that hinge to come off this way. Actually, to come off this way. So you want that hinge to be bent right in that area there. And they do that. That T4A4386 is not a very commonly ordered hinge, but it's what you want if you have a beveled style, a beveled hinge style. Okay, 5-knuckle heavyweight full mortise, 3386-3786. 3386 is a non-ferrous stainless or brass base. 3786 is steel-based. For beveled edge doors, use the hinge we just spoke about. These are the sizes that the material is available in. 4.5 by 4. You can read the rest of the chart. It's also going to give you the gauge of the leaf thickness. 6 inch tall, 0.203, as is 8 inch. Options are here as well. NRP, that's what this hinge actually is. T4B is a ball bearing hinge. So the T4A is an oil impregnated design that allows you, that affords you a substantially lower friction coefficient than a plain bearing hinge. It happens to be superior to the T4B ball bearing. The oil impregnated hinge is an upgrade to the typical ball bearing hinge. So this hinge right out of the box is an automatic upgrade compared to most people's, to most competitors. And you may have recalled that cross-reference chart did not have an ANSI standard here. That's because it's not a ball bearing hinge. the T4B is. So it doesn't apply because it's not an ANSI ball bearing hinge. Would be why that could be the case. Improved TCA, concealed bearing. That's really nice because you won't see any of those bearing packets. It'll be a much cleaner look. If you're going to go with a cleaner look like TCA, you might consider a 3-knuckle or even a 2-knuckle hinge. You can order these with radiused corners. Very uncommon in a heavyweight hinge, but not unheard of. Hospital tip, that's where they're going to grind the tip of the hinge down so as to prevent someone from looping something over the top of the hinge to hang something on it. That's considered ligature resistant. Ball tip, steeple tip, obviously those are decorative features. SSF, security stud feature. That requires a little deeper look. So security stud feature is a security feature that you would use generally in addition to non-removable pin. You've got the NRP feature here that prevents you from driving the pin out, but when the leaves are closed, this security stud will fit into this hole. When the door is closed, that stud's going to fit into that hole. You might drive the pin out, but you still won't separate the leaves because of that. McKinney also has a PSF option where that same stud is on the back side of the leaf and goes into the template. Pardon me, it goes into the reinforcement, acting as a further security feature as well. T4A3786, back to our page, our options. Raised barrel, we just talked about that. You literally bend the hinge leaves such that you move it off the rabbited area of the frame. Power transfer options, as well as magnetic monitoring. Tells you whether that hinge is in the open or closed position. That's your cut sheet. One other document to take a look at would be the template, and let's search that template out. By the time you're seeing this video, it will be uploaded here as well. So let's hop over. While we're waiting for that page to load, let's look at the images that we have uploaded here as well. Down below this video, the label, showing you a close-up of the finish, the bearing, or the T4A, the oil-impregnated packet, the non-removable pin set screw location, showing you an image of the finish, really, the logo that's there. Current standards, NFPA 80, does not require the UL label appear on approved hinges for use on fire doors. It is forward thinking that it's there, that's for sure. Showing you the cross-section of the hinge and how this is a full mortise based on the bend of these hinge leaves. That's a good example of how you might bend that a little bit further to skew that hinge leaf off that way, should it be a beveled edge hinge, a beveled edge door. The backside, showing you how clean that is on the backside. You will see a little bit of that when the door is closed. Then your fastener packet, machine screws, and wood screw. Okay. Okay, so yeah, the issue was the site did go down, or the internet connection went down, so let's pull up our McKinney site here. Let's get to the template for this item. Yes, here we go. Resource library, product templates, full mortise hinges. Let's try that. And indeed, this is the right template. T4 or T4A or T4B 3786, showing you the location of all the screw holes here. It's important to know. You want to make sure that you've got the right hinge that you're ordering for your application. You could, if you had a hinge that was extremely old, several decades old, it doesn't have to be in this sort of what we would call a template pattern. This sort of half-moon pattern, as some people call it. Back 100 years ago, those hinges were in the opposite orientation, or they're zigzag as well. It's kind of how they would have done that once upon a time. They'd reverse two of these. Other hinges around here, the more common TA2731 or T2714. These are all hinges that comply with this. Going to be different knuckle arrangements is what you'll see on these as well. Now, below this video here is a link to the manufacturer's page, which is here, and I wanted to point out to you. And from that link to the manufacturer's page, as seen here, you'll be able to view not only the current catalog that is here, and I would mention that there are going to be prior versions of the catalog here, 2017, 2012. We even have one from 1929 here. If you want to see what McKinney did almost 100 years ago, there it is. There's one about 20 years old. Those are nice to have because it allows you to go back in time and look at something that you've encountered that you can't find any reference to. Well, it's nice to be able to go back and look at an older catalog. Great image of a hospital tip, obviously steeple tip and ball tip. Flush construction on the tip here. That's nice because that's nice and clean. You know, these 3 and 2 knuckle hinges, nice and clean. Okay, so anything else that's on this page, I would just classify as encyclopedic documents is what we're going to keep here. And then all the McKinney products we sell by means of that horizontal navigation. Let's wrap up this video on camera. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Now, in conclusion, the name McKinney is quite synonymous, as you saw earlier in the, with the link to the catalog, of all things hinge or hanging device related. The manufacturer, McKinney, has been around for likely 100 years now, and you saw that reference to the catalog that's almost 100 years old. They were in a very different business back then, as you saw. Also in the 80s and even maybe the very early 90s, I know that McKinney was involved in Division 10 hardware. You may still come across, I had someone ask me about a year ago about a McKinney dual toilet paper dispenser. 2 rolls of toilet paper in a dual dispenser. McKinney Division 10 material was out there and still is actually, so you might come across that material. I find that their products are always clean, neat, finished very well. The back of the hinge is finished very well. You saw from those images that we looked at earlier about a reference to that. Their tech support people are generally pretty good. There's a gal over at the factory who has forgotten more about hinges than most people have ever learned, who I've talked to in the past. Extremely helpful. And of course, they're under the Assa Abloy umbrella, so McKinney's sister companies will be companies like Sargent and Medico and Corbin Russwin and Yale and Rockwood and Pemco and many, many, many others. Assa Abloy is a multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation, and there's great synergy between those companies. You'll find that you'll be able to order white suede powder coat from Sargent on locks and get the trim and auxiliary from Rockwood in the same finish. And you can get the hinges in the same finish, that sort of stuff. There's studio collections that run through the different product lines, all work together very cohesively from a design perspective. At the end of the day, if you want a very well-manufactured hinge by a company who does it very well for a very fair price, McKinney is certainly at the top of my list of those that I would suggest you consider. Any questions on the T4A3786-4-1, 4.5, NRP 26D, or any other McKinney product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.